Have you ever noticed how some stories begin to fade the moment they're told? How easily truth dissolves when powerful interests prefer it buried? In the autumn of 1911, deep in the Rocky Mountains of Montana, 6 men and 150 tons of steel locomotive disappeared without a trace. No wreckage, no bodies, no explanation. The official report called it a mechanical failure and was quietly archived away. But steel doesn't simply evaporate. Men don't just cease to exist unless someone or something makes them. The Silver Comet left Helena Station at 4:17 p.m. on October 11, 1911, carrying a 6-man crew and an express shipment for the U.S. Postal Service. By all accounts, it was a routine run on a well-established route. By dawn the next day, the train should have arrived in Spokane. It never did. Even more disturbing than its disappearance was what happened 40 years later, when a crew clearing an abandoned tunnel made a discovery that defied all logic. Inside solid stone, entombed like insects in amber, they found the Silver Comet and its crew perfectly preserved, as if time itself had stopped at the moment of their vanishing. The watches on their wrists had all stopped at precisely the same minute, 3:17 a.m., October 12, 1911. This is the story of the Silver Comet, a train that left the station in 1911 and vanished forever, until workers cracked open a forgotten tunnel 4 decades later. What they found inside defied all explanation. The Helena and Northwestern Railway Company knew these mountains better than most. Founded in 1889 as Montana's ambitious answer to the expanding railroad network, the company had built its reputation on conquering terrain others deemed impassable. By 1910, their network stretched through some of the most challenging landscapes in the American West: sheer cliffs, narrow passes, and unstable slopes that seemed to resist human intervention. The mountains, with their unpredictable weather and treacherous geology, had claimed lives before. Rock slides, avalanches, and sudden structural failures were not uncommon hazards for railway workers. But never in the company's history had an entire locomotive, crew, and all simply vanished without leaving the slightest trace. The Silver Comet, named for its distinctive silver-gray paint and polished chrome detailing, was one of the company's newest locomotives. Built in 1909, it represented the pride of American engineering: 76 feet of steel, wood, and brass, weighing approximately 150 tons. Its regular route between Helena and Spokane took it through some of the most spectacular and dangerous mountain passes in the northern Rockies. That fateful October night began like any other. The weather reports showed clear skies, with temperatures unusually mild for that time of year. Henry Dolan, the 47-year-old chief engineer, was known for his meticulous record-keeping and cautious approach to mountain crossings. His crew consisted of 5 other men: fireman Thomas Reed, 31, brakeman William Cooper, 28, conductor Samuel Jenkins, 52, and postal guards Robert Hawkins, 33, and Charles Peterson, 29. All were experienced railwaymen. All had families waiting for their return. "They were the best crew I had," said Station Master Frederick Halloran in his initial statement to investigators. "Dolan wouldn't take risks. If something wasn't right, he'd stop the train. That's why none of this makes any sense." The Silver Comet's final documented communication came at 11:42 p.m. on October 11th, when it passed Telegraph Station 14, approximately 28 miles into its journey. The operator reported nothing unusual, just a standard signal confirming the train's progress and position. "Silver Comet passing mile 28, all clear, weather holding, ETA, next checkpoint, 1:15 a.m. 4 more routine communications followed over the next several hours, each confirming normal operation and progress. The last came at 3:12 a.m. on October 12th, as the train approached what local workers called Whispering Pass, a narrow canyon with unusual acoustic properties that seemed to amplify and distort sound. Approaching mile 47, entering Tunnel 9, visibility poor due to ground fog, reduced speed to caution. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., Telegraph Station 16 recorded a partial transmission, cut off mid-sentence. Track vibrating abnormally. Strange light ahead. Request adv... Nothing more was ever heard from the Silver Comet or its crew. When the train failed to arrive at its next scheduled checkpoint, alarm bells were raised. By noon on October 12th, a search party had been dispatched to the last known location. What they found, or rather, what they didn't find, would become the first chapter in one of the most perplexing mysteries in railroad history. There was no wreckage, no debris, no sign of derailment or collision. The tracks themselves appeared undamaged and undisturbed. There were no indications of a rock slide or avalanche. The tunnel that the train had reported entering, Tunnel 9, showed no signs of collapse. The search party followed the tracks through the tunnel, expecting to find some evidence of the missing train on the other side. But the Silver Comet had simply ceased to exist somewhere between entering the tunnel and exiting it. Even more puzzling was the report from search party leader Captain James Morton. We found the tracks intact through the entire length of Tunnel 9. There were no signs of derailment, collision, or obstruction. It's as if the train was plucked from the rails while in motion. The only unusual observation was a faint, sweet metallic odor inside the tunnel, similar to ozone after a lightning strike, and a strange residue on the rails that seemed to dissipate upon touch. For 3 weeks, the Helena and Northwestern Railway Company conducted what appeared to be an exhaustive search. Teams of men combed every inch of the surrounding wilderness. They searched ravines, gullies, and dense forests, looking for any sign of wreckage or human remains. They explored mine shafts and natural caves in the area, wondering if perhaps some massive sinkhole had swallowed the train whole. Nothing was ever found. On November 2, 1911, the company issued its official statement, a brief 4-sentence press release that concluded the Silver Comet had likely suffered catastrophic mechanical failure and had somehow derailed in a location that remains inaccessible to search teams. The statement made no specific mention of the crew members by name and offered no details about compensation to their families. The case was officially closed just 3 weeks after it began, but for the families left behind, and for a handful of railway workers who had witnessed strange phenomena along that same stretch of track, the official explanation felt hollow and incomplete. Something wasn't right about the way the company had so quickly abandoned the search, and the conspicuous absence of wreckage troubled those who understood the basic physics of train accidents. Steel doesn't vanish without a trace. Men don't simply disappear into thin air unless someone or something makes them. They called it the Whispering Pass, a narrow valley where the wind echoed through the tunnels with eerie precision. Many workers reported hearing voices, even screams. But engineers dismissed it as acoustics until, that is, the Silver Comet disappeared without a trace. Samuel Trask had felt it first. 3 weeks before the train vanished, Trask, a track inspector for the Helena and Northwestern Railway, had been conducting routine maintenance checks along the line approaching Tunnel 9. What he experienced that day was anything but routine. The tracks were humming, he wrote in his official report dated September 19, 1911. Not the normal vibration you feel when a train is coming. Something different, deeper, like the mountain itself was breathing. Trask's report also noted unusual seismic activity and concerning structural instability in the bedrock surrounding Tunnel 9. He recommended an immediate engineering assessment and suggested temporarily suspending service through the pass until the anomalies could be properly investigated. His report was stamped "Reviewed" on September 21, 1911, and filed away. No action was taken. No services were suspended. When we obtained access to the original document through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2008, we discovered something troubling. Large sections of Trask's report had been redacted with black ink before being included in the official investigation. The version that company executives and government inspectors saw was substantially different from what Trask had actually written. In his personal journal, which remained in his family's possession for decades before being donated to the Montana Historical Society in 1967, Trask was far more explicit about what he had experienced. October 1, 1911. Returned to mile 47 today. The vibrations are stronger now. Pressed my ear to the rail and heard what sounded like machinery operating far below the surface. Folkson, another inspector, heard it too. He said it reminded him of the mining drills in Butte, but deeper, more rhythmic. Something isn't right. The tunnel wall at the north entrance has shifted almost 2 inches since my last measurement. I've reported it 3 times now. Thornton, his supervisor, told me to stop being hysterical, said it was just normal settlement. But I've been working these rails for 17 years. This isn't normal. The men won't go near the place after dark anymore. They say they hear voices in the tunnel, whispering in a language they can't understand. I thought it was just superstition until yesterday. I was taking measurements alone near sundown when I heard it too. A low murmur, like someone standing right behind me. When I turned, there was nobody there. Just the cold wind coming through the pass. Trask wasn't alone in his concerns. In interviews conducted with surviving railway workers from that era, we uncovered a pattern of unreported incidents along the same stretch of track. William Folkson, assistant track inspector. That whole section gave us trouble from day one. Tools would go missing. Equipment would malfunction for no reason. We'd secure a support beam one day and come back the next to find it shifted or completely removed. At first we thought it was sabotage, maybe locals who didn't want the railway cutting through their land. But nobody lived within 30 miles of that pass. Edward Chambers, tunnel excavator. We lost 3 men during the initial drilling of Tunnel 9. The company records show they died in a controlled detonation accident, but that's not what happened. I was there. There was no detonation scheduled that day. The men were taking measurements when a section of the wall just collapsed on them. But it didn't collapse like normal rock. It moved like it was being pushed from the other side. Perhaps most disturbing was the testimony of Martin Redfern, a telegraph operator who worked the night shift at Station 16, the last station to receive communication from the Silver Comet. It wasn't the first time we'd had strange transmissions from that section. About a month before the comet disappeared, I received a telegraph from another train passing through. The operator was clearly agitated. He reported seeing lights inside the tunnel when there shouldn't have been any. Not like lanterns or signals. He described them as blue-white, like electricity, but moving like water. His transmission cut off mid-sentence, just like the comets did later. When that train arrived at the next station, the operator had no memory of sending any such message. The indigenous Blackfoot communities who had inhabited the region for generations had their own perspectives on Whispering Pass. They called it the breath of the earth and considered it a place of powerful spiritual significance. According to oral histories recorded by anthropologist Dr. Eleanor Whitman in the 1950s, tribal elders described the pass as a place where the boundary between worlds grows thin, and where the earth sometimes swallows what does not belong. The mountain breathes in, the mountain breathes out, one elder told Dr. Whitman. Sometimes what goes in doesn't come back out. For centuries before the railway's arrival, the Blackfoot avoided building permanent settlements near the pass, and would only travel through it during specific times of year after performing elaborate rituals to ensure safe passage. When railway surveyors first proposed cutting a tunnel through the mountain in 1908, local Blackfoot representatives reportedly approached company officials with warnings. Their concerns were dismissed as native superstition and an attempt to obstruct progress, according to company meeting minutes from April 1908. 3 years later, the Silver Comet and its crew would vanish at exactly the spot the Blackfoot had warned about. But perhaps the most compelling evidence that something wasn't right about Tunnel 9 came from modern scientific analysis conducted decades after the incident. In 1987, geologists from Montana State University were permitted to study the area as part of a broader assessment of seismic stability along historic railway routes. Their findings, published in the Journal of Structural Geology, described an anomalous geological formation underneath the original path of Tunnel 9. Using ground-penetrating radar and seismic imaging technology unavailable in 1911, the team discovered what appeared to be a massive cavern system approximately 80 feet beneath the tunnel's original path. More puzzling were the unusual magnetic readings they detected, fluctuating electromagnetic fields that seemed to intensify and diminish in a regular, almost rhythmic pattern. "It's unlike anything we've documented elsewhere in North America," wrote lead researcher Dr. Catherine Mercer. "The electromagnetic anomalies register as if there were large-scale machinery operating beneath the surface, yet we can detect no actual source for these readings. Additionally, the geological composition doesn't match the surrounding rock formations. It's as if this section of the mountain has completely different origins than everything around it." Dr. Mercer's team also recorded unexplained subsonic vibrations emanating from deep within the mountain, sound frequencies below the threshold of human hearing, but detectable with specialized equipment. These vibrations correspond almost exactly to what early railway workers described as the mountain's whisper, Dr. Mercer noted. While too low for human ears to consciously perceive, these frequencies have been shown to induce feelings of unease, anxiety, and even hallucinations in prolonged exposure scenarios. What makes this scientific evidence particularly significant is how perfectly it aligns with Samuel Trask's original observations from 1911, observations that were dismissed, redacted, and buried by the railway company. Trask had been right. The mountain was breathing. The tracks were vibrating with unexplained energy. Something beneath the surface was active, alive, responding to the human intrusion above it, and he had warned them. On October 10, 1911, just one day before the Silver Comet's final journey, Trask made his last desperate attempt to prevent disaster. He personally delivered a letter to the Helena office of Superintendent William Harrison, detailing all his observations and explicitly requesting that all traffic through Tunnel 9 be suspended immediately. The letter, preserved in Harrison's personal papers donated to the Montana Historical Society after his death, bears a single handwritten note in the margin, dated October 11, 1911. Trask becoming a nuisance. Reassign after the comet returns. Harrison never had the opportunity to reassign Trask. The Silver Comet never returned, and the most damning evidence of the company's negligence wouldn't be discovered until 1951, when a team clearing an abandoned railway tunnel would stumble upon something impossible: the missing train, entombed within solid rock, its crew perfectly preserved as if they had vanished only yesterday. But before we explore that chilling discovery, we must first understand what happened to those who were left behind, and the wall of silence that the Helena and Northwestern Railway Company built around the mystery of the Silver Comet. When nature begins to whisper warnings, and we label them as superstition, that's when tragedy becomes inevitable. Ignoring the signs of instability led to the entombing of 6 men alive under tons of sliding limestone. Or perhaps it was something much worse. After the disappearance of the Silver Comet, the Helena and Northwestern Railway Company issued only a 4-sentence press release. No mention of the missing men's names, no investigation updates, no full search effort. When an institution goes silent, it's rarely due to ignorance. It's often to protect itself. The quiet from those in power is the loudest alarm of all. The morning after the Silver Comet failed to arrive in Spokane, confusion quickly gave way to concern, then alarm, then a strange and pervasive quiet. Margaret Dolan, wife of engineer Henry Dolan, was among the first to sense something was wrong. Henry had never missed a telegraph home during his overnight runs. By 10 a.m. on October 12th, when no message had arrived, she contacted the railway office in Helena. At first, they told me not to worry. She later recounted in a 1912 letter to her sister, said the telegraph lines were probably down due to weather, though the sky here was perfectly clear. When I called again at noon, they said there had been a minor delay and that Henry would be in touch soon. By evening, when I went to the station in person, the clerk wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I knew something terrible had happened. Similar experiences were reported by the families of all 6 missing men. Initial reassurances gave way to evasive responses, which eventually transformed into complete institutional silence. The company's official press release issued on November 2, 1911, remains a masterclass in corporate obfuscation. The Helena and Northwestern Railway Company regrets to announce that Train 41, the Silver Comet, has been determined lost due to mechanical failure during its October 11-12 journey. After exhaustive search efforts, company officials have concluded that the train's location is irretrievable. Normal operations have resumed on all lines. The company extends its condolences to affected parties. Note the careful wording, mechanical failure, rather than accident or disaster. Affected parties rather than grieving families. Irretrievable rather than unknown. Even more telling was what the statement didn't include: the names of the missing men, the specific location where the train was last confirmed, or any details about the search operations that had supposedly been exhaustive. The press release was reproduced in several local newspapers, often word for word, with minimal additional reporting. No journalists were permitted to accompany search parties. No photographs were released from the search operation. When reporters attempted to interview search team members, they found them either unreachable or bound by confidentiality agreements. Clara Reed, wife of fireman Thomas Reed, described the company's treatment of the families in a 1913 journal entry. "It's been over a year, and I still don't know what happened to my Thomas." The company paid us 6 months' salary as compassionate compensation, then nothing. When I asked to see the investigation report, they said it was internal documentation and not available to families. They sent a man to our house last month, not to check on us, but to ask if I'd received any of Thomas's personal effects that might have been company property, his logbook specifically. I told him Thomas didn't keep a personal log, but Henry Dolan did. The man's face changed when I mentioned that. He asked if Henry had ever shared his logbook with Thomas, or if I'd seen any copies. What are they so afraid of finding? Clara Reed's question was astute. What was the company so afraid of? What information were they so determined to control? In the months following the disappearance, families of the missing men began to organize, sharing information and pressing for answers. They discovered that the exhaustive search had lasted less than 3 weeks and had covered only the immediate vicinity of Tunnel 9, not the broader wilderness area where a train might have somehow derailed and fallen from the mountainside. Letters from family members pleading for updates and information were found unopened decades later in the company's archives, bundled together with a note from the legal department advising that no written responses should be provided to claimant families at this time. The company's silence extended beyond the families to its own workforce. Railway employees who had participated in the search were transferred to distant stations or assigned to different routes. Several workers who had been vocal about the strange conditions around Tunnel 9 found themselves suddenly unemployed. Samuel Trask, the inspector who had filed multiple safety complaints about the tunnel, was terminated on November 5, 1911, 3 days after the company's official statement declared the case closed. His termination letter cited persistent insubordination and dissemination of false information harmful to company interests. In a particularly cruel twist, the company required the families of the missing men to wait a full 7 years before declaring them legally dead, the standard waiting period for missing persons at that time. This meant that widows like Margaret Dolan and Clara Reed could not access their husbands' pensions, insurance benefits, or even formally remarry until 1918. During those 7 years, the Helena and Northwestern Railway Company underwent a series of structural reorganizations, merging with larger rail corporations and eventually dissolving its original corporate entity entirely. By the time the missing men were legally declared deceased, there was technically no longer a Helena and Northwestern Railway Company to hold accountable. The family's attempts to pursue legal action were consistently thwarted. Court records from 1919-1921 show at least 4 separate lawsuits filed by the collective families, all of which were dismissed on various procedural grounds or settled for minimal compensation with strict confidentiality clauses. Perhaps most telling was the company's handling of Tunnel 9 itself. Within weeks of the Silver Comet's disappearance, all railway maps were revised. The new versions showed Tunnel 9 as incomplete, a partially constructed passage that had never been fully excavated or used for regular traffic. This directly contradicted dozens of railway schedules, crew logs, and maintenance records from 1909-1911, which clearly documented regular train passages through the completed tunnel. Yet almost overnight, the official position became that Tunnel 9 had never been completed, and thus could not have been where the Silver Comet vanished. Former railway surveyor James Morrison described the mapping discrepancy in a 1932 interview. "It was the damnedest thing. One day I'm reviewing maintenance schedules for a tunnel I'd helped design and watch being built over 2 years, and the next day I'm being told that tunnel never existed in its completed form. I had the original blueprints in my own files, showed the tunnel extending 85 meters through the ridge. Then new blueprints appeared showing it as a mere 14-meter exploratory shaft. When I brought this up with management, I was told there had been a clerical error in the original documentation. A clerical error that dozens of engineers, surveyors, and construction crews somehow never noticed for 2 years? That's when I knew something was being covered up." Morrison's suspicions were well-founded. In 1997, railway historian Dr. Paul Kensington discovered an internal company memo dated October 15, 1911, just 3 days after the Silver Comet's disappearance, with explicit instructions to the cartography department: urgent. Revise all Route 7 maps to show Tunnel 9 as incomplete, abandoned. Replace all posted schedules to reflect redirection through Southern Pass. Collect and secure all previous versions. Implementation immediate and mandatory. The memo was signed by Superintendent William Harrison, the same executive who had dismissed Samuel Trask's safety warnings just days earlier. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the company's response wasn't what they did. It was what they knew and chose to hide. In 2005, during renovation of an old railway administration building in Helena, construction workers discovered a sealed wall safe behind a bookcase in what had once been Superintendent Harrison's office. Inside was a small collection of documents that had apparently been hidden away since late 1911. Among them was a preliminary geological survey dated June 1908, conducted before construction of Tunnel 9 began, which identified significant concerns about the stability of the mountain at precisely the location where the tunnel would later be built. Anomalous readings detected in core samples from proposed Tunnel 9 location. Magnetic deviation 17.3 degrees from expected. Unusual mineral composition unlike surrounding formations. Recommend alternative route through Southern Ridge despite additional 1.8-mile track requirement. Even more damning was a handwritten note from Harrison himself, dated October 13, 1911, the day after the Silver Comet vanished. Second team reports same condition, tunnel entrance intact, but no exit visible on north side. Solid rock face where opening should be. Impossible condition unless tunnel was never completed, which we know is false. Magnetic compass equipment malfunctioning within 100 yards of site. All documentation of previous geological concerns must be secured immediately. Board meeting scheduled for 3 p.m. to determine official position. No written reports from search teams henceforth. These documents, now preserved in the Montana State Archives, reveal a company that wasn't merely negligent, it was actively engaged in concealing evidence, rewriting history, and constructing an elaborate fiction to distance itself from whatever truly happened to the Silver Comet and its crew. When modern investigators asked why such elaborate measures to hide the truth, the answer emerged from financial records of the period. The Helena and Northwestern Railway had been in serious financial distress throughout 1910-1911. Construction costs had exceeded projections, and investors were threatening to withdraw support. The company desperately needed to demonstrate that its mountain routes were safe, reliable, and profitable. A disaster involving an entire train disappearing without explanation would have destroyed investor confidence and likely bankrupted the company. The 6 men aboard the Silver Comet were, in the coldest financial calculus, sacrificial casualties in a larger battle for corporate survival. As railway historian Catherine Morley observed in her 2010 analysis of the case, the Helena and Northwestern didn't just lose a train in 1911. They buried the truth about it with the same methodical precision with which they had laid their tracks, one deliberate section at a time, creating a path that led away from their own culpability. And the silence would have been complete, the truth forever entombed alongside the missing train, if not for what happened 40 years later, when a routine tunnel excavation unearthed the most impossible discovery in American railway history. When we discover something that shouldn't exist, it forces us to ask, who decided to bury it, and why? Maps from that era show a half-built tunnel, one officially marked as collapsed during construction. But when 1950s workers began excavation, they found a complete, functioning section, sealed shut from both ends. Some secrets are sealed not by nature, but by intention. The morning of June 17, 1951 began like any other for Michael Dolan. At 26 years old, he was the youngest foreman in the Montana Central Railway's maintenance division, an achievement made more remarkable by his family name. As the grandson of Henry Dolan, the engineer who had vanished with the Silver Comet 4 decades earlier, Michael had faced subtle resistance throughout his railway career. No one said it directly, he later recalled in a 1975 interview, but I could feel it. There was always this unspoken question. Would I ask too many questions? Would I dig too deep into a history everyone seemed determined to forget? That morning, Michael and his crew were assigned to assess an abandoned tunnel near mile marker 47, a section of the old Helena-Spokane route that had been bypassed in the 1920s in favor of a more gradual southern approach. The railway was considering reopening some of these abandoned mountain routes to accommodate increased freight traffic. What Michael didn't realize, what no one had told him, was that his assignment would take him directly to the last known location of his grandfather's vanished train. They gave me coordinates and a basic survey map, Michael said. It identified the site as Exploratory Shaft 9B, not even a proper tunnel designation. The map showed it extending only about 45 feet into the mountainside before ending in a rockfall. Simple enough job: assess the stability, determine if clearing was feasible, estimate costs. But what Michael and his team found when they arrived at the site immediately contradicted their documentation. Rather than a shallow exploratory shaft, they discovered the entrance to what was clearly a fully constructed tunnel, heavily overgrown and partially obscured by decades of erosion and vegetation, but unmistakably a complete railway passage. The first thing that struck me was the stonework, remembered Ernest Fletcher, one of the workers on Michael's crew. This wasn't some half-finished project. The entrance had proper masonry reinforcement, dressed stones in an arch configuration. That's not something you do for an exploratory shaft. That's finishing work for a permanent tunnel. More puzzling still was the condition of the tunnel entrance. While 4 decades of abandonment had allowed vegetation to obscure much of the exterior, the actual passage appeared to have been deliberately sealed with a combination of large boulders, cement, and iron reinforcement bars. "It looked like a bank vault," Fletcher said, "like someone had tried to make damn sure nothing was getting in or out." When Michael consulted his map again, another discrepancy became apparent. According to the official documentation, the abandoned shaft should have extended from east to west, following the natural contour of the mountain ridge. But the sealed tunnel they had discovered was oriented north to south, precisely the alignment of the original Helena-Spokane route that had supposedly never been completed. "That's when I knew," Michael later said. This was Tunnel 9, the actual Tunnel 9, the one the company claimed had never been finished, the one where the silver comet was last reported before it vanished. Michael's crew spent the first day simply clearing the exterior and assessing the structure of the sealed entrance. As they removed decades of overgrowth, they uncovered something else the maps hadn't indicated: a small maintenance access door set into the rock beside the main tunnel entrance. Unlike the primary passage, this door wasn't completely sealed, merely locked with a rusted iron mechanism that gave way after persistent effort. What they found inside would change their lives forever. The maintenance passage was narrow, barely wide enough for one man to navigate while crouching. It extended approximately 30 feet into the mountain before opening into what should have been the main tunnel cavity. But instead of finding an open railway passage, Michael and 2 of his men encountered a solid wall of smooth, undisturbed limestone. "It made no sense," said Robert Chambers, the crew's geologist. "According to every principle of tunnel construction, we should have been standing inside a hollowed-out passage. Instead, we were facing what appeared to be virgin rock, as if the tunnel had never been excavated at all." Even more puzzling was what they found when Chambers examined the stone more closely. Using a geology hammer, he chipped away a small section of the rock face. "The composition was wrong," Chambers reported. "This wasn't the same limestone as the surrounding mountain. It had a different crystalline structure, almost as if it had been melted and reformed. And it was seamless. No visible strata, no fault lines, no natural cleavage planes. I'd never seen anything like it." As the team expanded their investigation over subsequent days, they made another discovery that defied explanation. Using sensitive surveying equipment, they determined that the solid rock filling what should have been the tunnel cavity wasn't merely blocking the passage. It was perfectly contiguous with the surrounding mountain structure, as if it had formed naturally over millions of years. Yet historical records clearly documented the tunnel's construction between 1908 and 1909. Payroll records showed hundreds of man-hours spent excavating this very passage. Dynamite requisitions, timber orders, masonry contracts all confirmed that Tunnel 9 had been fully completed and operational for at least 2 years before the Silver Comet's disappearance. Something had filled in a man-made tunnel with what appeared to be naturally formed rock, Michael explained. But that's geologically impossible. Rock doesn't just grow back. The team's preliminary investigation caught the attention of railway executives who quickly authorized a more extensive exploration. By July 1951, a full excavation team was on site, equipped with industrial drills and modern tunneling equipment. Their mission? To determine if the original tunnel could be recovered and reused, or if a new passage would need to be created. What no one anticipated was what they would find approximately 80 feet into their new excavation. On July 24, 1951, at 10:17 a.m., drill operator Frank Morrison reported an unexpected change in resistance. After days of grinding through solid limestone, His equipment suddenly broke through into what felt like an open cavity. When the dust cleared, the workers found themselves staring into what appeared to be the original Tunnel 9, a perfectly preserved railway passage that, according to official records, had never existed. The preservation was immaculate, reported site supervisor Gerald Thompson. The original rail lines were still in place. The timber supports showed no rot, no degradation. It looked as if it had been sealed away mere days ago, not 40 years earlier. But what they found approximately 120 feet inside this preserved section of tunnel would become the most disturbing discovery in American railway history. There, entombed within what should have been the central passage of Tunnel 9, sat the Silver Comet, intact, upright on the tracks, and showing no signs of damage or derailment. Its silver-gray paint still gleamed in the workers' flashlight beams. Its mechanical components appeared in perfect working order, as if it had simply stopped and been frozen in time. Most shocking of all were the 6 figures discovered aboard, the missing crew, perfectly preserved, found at their respective stations as if they had been caught in mid-action at the very moment of their disappearance. They didn't look dead, Michael Dolan later recounted, his voice hollow with the memory. That was the most unsettling part. They looked like wax figures, unnaturally still, but with such lifelike detail. My grandfather was standing in the engineer's position, one hand on the throttle, the other reaching toward the brake. His eyes were open, fixed on something ahead of him. His mouth was open too, as if he'd been speaking, or perhaps shouting, when whatever happened, happened. Medical examiners who later studied photographs from the site described the condition of the bodies as incompatible with any known process of death and decomposition. There was no decay, no mummification, no signs of trauma or rigor mortis. The men's skin retained its natural coloration and elasticity. Their clothing showed no deterioration. It was as if they had been perfectly preserved in some unknown medium, wrote Dr. Leonard Harrison, one of the first medical professionals to examine the remains after their removal from the tunnel. The closest analogy would be insects preserved in amber, but there was no visible preservative substance. Whatever stopped their biological processes did so with such totality and immediacy that not even cellular breakdown had begun. Perhaps the most chilling detail emerged when investigators checked the pocket watches carried by each crew member. All 6 timepieces had stopped at precisely the same moment, 3:17 a.m., October 12, 1911, exactly the time recorded for the Silver Comet's final, incomplete telegraph transmission. Aboard the train, everything appeared in its proper place. The postal cargo was intact in the mail car. The engine's coal supply remained partially full. The official documentation and manifests were found in their proper storage compartment. Among these papers was Henry Dolan's logbook, the document that Clara Reed had mentioned the company seemed particularly interested in recovering. The book was intact, its final entry dated October 11, 1911, written in Dolan's steady hand. Track line sings tonight. Air feels wrong. The machine hums though cold. If we do not return, it wasn't by chance. The final page bore an unusual characteristic. Its edges were charred, as if exposed to intense heat, while the rest of the book showed no signs of fire damage. The discovery of the Silver Comet should have made national headlines. It should have triggered a federal investigation, scientific studies, and a complete reassessment of what was possible in our understanding of physics and geology. Instead, within 72 hours of the discovery, something very different happened. On July 27, 1951, the excavation site was abruptly closed. Military personnel from nearby Malmstrom Air Force Base arrived without warning, establishing a secure perimeter and removing all civilian workers from the area. All photographs, samples, and documentation were confiscated. The workers were required to sign national security non-disclosure agreements under threat of federal prosecution. The train, its preserved crew, and all evidence of their discovery were removed from the mountain under cover of darkness. According to eyewitnesses who later violated their confidentiality agreements, the operation involved multiple heavy transport vehicles and took almost a week to complete. They brought in specialized equipment, reported maintenance worker Thomas Grant in a 1973 interview. Some kind of refrigerated containment units for the bodies. Scientists in what looked like radiation suits. Military guards everywhere. They treated that tunnel like it was ground zero of an atomic test site. By August 1951, all evidence of the excavation had been removed. The newly cleared tunnel was dynamited shut, and the entire area was designated a restricted zone, officially due to geological instability. The railway company issued a brief statement. Exploratory operations at the former Tunnel 9 site have determined that reopening the passage is not structurally feasible. Alternative routes will be developed. No mention was made of the Silver Comet, its crew, or the impossible circumstances of their discovery. For the families of the missing men who had spent 4 decades wondering about the fate of their loved ones, the revelation came not through official channels, but through whispered conversations and anonymous phone calls from workers who had been at the site. Margaret Dolan, then 81 years old and in failing health, reportedly received a visit from a man who identified himself only as a former railway employee. "He told me they'd found Henry," her nurse later recounted. "Said he looked just like he had the day he left. Said they'd found his logbook, too, with a message about the track singing." Mrs. Dolan became very agitated, said that Henry had mentioned the same thing to her before his final trip. She kept asking where they'd taken him, but the man didn't know. She died 3 days later. I've always thought it was the knowing that finally let her go. The truth about what happened to the Silver Comet and its crew, and what was done with their remains after their 1951 discovery, might have remained permanently obscured if not for one man's determination to uncover the facts his family had been denied for decades. Michael Dolan, who had looked into the preserved face of his long-lost grandfather, would spend the next 30 years of his life pursuing answers. What he uncovered would expose not just a corporate cover-up, but a mystery that challenged the very foundations of our understanding of physical reality. When we uncover something that shouldn't exist, it forces us to ask not just who buried it, but what impossible truth they were trying to hide. Before departure, the Comet's engineer, Henry Dolan, scribbled cryptic notes in his logbook. Trackline sings, "Tonight, air feels wrong. If we do not return, it wasn't by chance." When history warns us through the written word and we dismiss it as paranoia, we risk repeating the same silence that killed the innocent. Following the abrupt government seizure of the Silver Comet and its preserved crew in 1951, Michael Dolan found himself in an impossible position. As a railway employee who had signed multiple non-disclosure agreements, he was legally forbidden from discussing what he had witnessed inside the mountain. As the grandson of Henry Dolan, he was desperate to understand what had happened to his grandfather and to secure whatever remains might still exist for proper burial. "They took everything," Michael recalled in private recordings made years later. "Not just the train and the bodies, but every photograph, every sample, every scrap of paper that might prove what we found. They even confiscated our personal notebooks and the clothing we'd been wearing, claiming potential contamination." But what were we contaminated with? That's what I couldn't stop asking myself. In the weeks following the discovery, 2 members of Michael's original excavation crew died under circumstances that some considered suspicious. Ernest Fletcher, who had been among the first to enter the sealed tunnel, suffered a fatal fall into a quarry while supposedly taking measurements, despite being known for his caution and sure-footedness. Robert Chambers, the geologist who had analyzed the anomalous rock composition, was found dead in his garage, apparently from carbon monoxide poisoning due to a faulty exhaust system in his nearly new automobile. These deaths intensified Michael's determination to uncover the truth, while simultaneously making him more cautious about how he pursued his investigation. Rather than confronting authorities directly, he began a methodical, covert gathering of information that would span decades. His first breakthrough came through an unexpected source. In 1952, while attending the funeral of Samuel Trask, the track inspector who had warned of dangers at Tunnel 9 before the Silver Comet's disappearance, Michael was approached by an elderly woman who introduced herself as Evelyn Trask, Samuel's daughter. "My father kept everything," she told him privately after the service. "Every report, every letter, every note about that tunnel. He knew they would try to bury the truth, so he made sure there was another copy. When they fired him, he took it all home." Evelyn invited Michael to her home, where she showed him a metal lockbox her father had kept hidden behind a false wall in his basement. Inside was a comprehensive collection of documents related to Tunnel 9 and the Silver Comet, including copies of the safety reports that had been redacted in the official investigation. Most valuable of all was a leather-bound book wrapped in oilskin and sealed in a glass jar. Henry Dolan's personal logbook, or more precisely, a duplicate of it. "Your grandfather and my father were friends," Evelyn explained. "They both mistrusted the company, especially after the accidents during tunnel construction. Henry started keeping two identical logs, the official one that stayed on the train, and this copy that he updated and left with my father before each run. He said it was insurance, in case something happened, and the company tried to change the story. The logbook provided insights that would prove crucial to understanding what had happened in October 1911. Unlike the official log found aboard the recovered train, which contained only operational notes and technical specifications, Henry's personal log included detailed observations about the increasingly strange phenomena he had witnessed along the Tunnel 9 route. Entries from September 1911 described unusual vibrations in the rails approaching the tunnel, unexplained cold spots inside the passage, and mechanical anomalies that defied explanation. September 18, 1911. Third time this month, the pressure gauges have fluctuated wildly inside the tunnel. Needle swings from normal to maximum and back again within seconds, though no actual pressure change is felt in the system. Reed, the fireman, thinks it's faulty equipment, but it's happened on two different engines now. September 24, 1911, passed through Tunnel 9 near midnight. Entire crew reported seeing strange lights in the darkness ahead, blue-white, shifting like liquid. By the time we reached their apparent location, nothing visible. Cooper, the brakeman, insists he saw something solid within the lights, a shape or structure, but couldn't describe it clearly. October 3, 1911. The voices are back. First noticed them in late August. Thought it was just wind through the tunnel creating odd acoustics. But tonight, all of us heard what sounded like words. Not in English or any language we recognized. Jenkins, the conductor, suggested we report it. But what exactly would we say? That the mountain is talking to us? We'd be laughed out of the station. The final entries became increasingly urgent, suggesting Henry Dolan had developed a theory about what was happening inside Tunnel 9. A theory he was reluctant to put into writing, even in his private log. October 9, 1911. Met with Trask today. He's been measuring the tunnel and claims its dimensions have changed, that it's actually longer on the inside than its external measurements would allow. Says the company has ignored 3 separate reports about it. We both know what we're experiencing isn't natural, but neither of us can explain it in terms that wouldn't sound insane. October 10, 1911, found Jenkins making markings in chalk along the tunnel walls yesterday. Said he's been tracking the movement. According to his measurements, the tunnel's midpoint shifts by approximately 3 inches between daytime and nighttime runs, as if the interior space is breathing. I told him to stop. We agreed not to discuss it. With the others, yet. The final entry, dated October 11, 1911, the day of the Silver Comet's last departure, was far more explicit than the version found in the official logbook aboard the recovered train. We leave tonight, though every instinct tells me to refuse this run. The trackline sings louder than ever, a vibration you can feel in your teeth, your bones. The air around the tunnel entrance feels wrong, heavier, somehow charged. Trask came to warn me this morning. Said the company removed his instruments yesterday, told him his services were no longer required in that section. Most disturbing of all? Last night I dreamt I was still aboard the engine, but the tunnel had no end. We just kept moving forward into darkness while the walls closed in around us. In the dream, I could see our faces reflected in the windows, frozen, like photographs. If we do not return, it wasn't by chance or mechanical failure. Something is happening in that mountain, something the company suspects but won't acknowledge. I leave this record in case the truth is buried with us. When Michael first read these words, the final thoughts his grandfather had recorded before disappearing into Tunnel 9, he was struck not just by their prophetic nature, but by how accurately they described what had eventually been discovered in 1951. The crew, frozen like photographs, entombed within a mountain that had seemingly coastal closed around them. Armed with his grandfather's private log and Samuel Trask's suppressed reports, Michael had compelling evidence of both supernatural phenomena and corporate negligence. What he lacked was a scientific explanation for what could have possibly preserved a train and its crew, intact and unchanging, for 4 decades within solid rock. That explanation would begin to emerge in 1958 when Michael managed to establish contact with Dr. Eleanor Whitman, the anthropologist who had recorded Blackfoot oral histories about the breath of the earth. Through Dr. Whitman, Michael was introduced to concepts that bridged indigenous understanding and emerging scientific theory in ways that would profoundly symbolically influence his investigation. The Blackfoot elders described the pass as a place where time folds upon itself, Dr. Whitman explained in their correspondence. In their cosmology, certain locations exist where the barriers between different realities become permeable. They believed this particular mountain contained a type of gateway, not to another physical place, but to what they called the space between moments. While such concepts might have seemed purely metaphysical, Dr. Whitman connected them to emerging theories in quantum physics. What the elders described as the mountain's breath, cycles of opening and closing, bears remarkable similarities to what modern physicists call space-time fluctuations, the idea that time itself might move differently in certain locations, or that matter might transition between different states of reality isn't merely spiritual symbolism. It's increasingly supported by theoretical physics. This convergence of indigenous knowledge and scientific theory led Michael to seek out experts who might help explain the seemingly impossible preservation of the Silver Comet and its crew. In 1962, he established correspondence with Dr. Richard Feynman, the renowned physicist whose work on quantum electrodynamics had earned him the Nobel Prize. While initially skeptical, Feynman became intrigued after reviewing the geological data and witness accounts Michael had compiled. In a letter dated November 1963, Feynman proposed what he called a speculative but not entirely impossible explanation. The phenomenon you've described, matter seemingly trapped in a state of temporal suspension within a crystallized medium, suggests a localized disruption in the normal flow of time. While conventional physics would dismiss this as impossible, recent work in quantum field theory suggests that under certain extreme conditions, involving precisely the kind of electromagnetic anomalies your grandfather documented, a form of phase transition might occur. In simplest terms, matter might become temporarily disconnected from our normal temporal progression, existing in what we might call a null time state. If this occurred simultaneously with geological activity, the mountain's breathing as the indigenous accounts describe it, the result could indeed be something akin to natural amber formation, but with time itself as the preservative medium. I stress that this is highly speculative and would require conditions that have never been observed in controlled settings. But the consistency of the accounts across both indigenous knowledge and modern observation suggests something genuinely anomalous may have occurred in your Tunnel 9. Feynman's theoretical framework, while revolutionary, was still missing a crucial element. What could have triggered such an unprecedented space-time anomaly at precisely 3:17 a.m. on October 12, 1911? The answer to that question emerged from an unlikely source. In 1973, Michael Dolan attended a confidential meeting with Howard Pierce, a retired archivist who had worked for the railway company during both the 1911 disappearance and the 1951 rediscovery. Pierce, elderly and ill, had requested the meeting through intermediaries, claiming he had carried the burden of knowledge long enough. What Pierce revealed would complete the puzzle in the most disturbing way possible. It wasn't an accident, Pierce told Michael. Not a natural phenomenon, not an act of God. The company knew exactly what it was doing when it built Tunnel 9 through that specific section of the mountain. According to Pierce, geological surveys conducted in 1908 had detected unusual properties in that particular formation. Properties that the company's scientific consultants recognized as valuable but extremely dangerous. They found an unprecedented concentration of rare earth elements in the mountain's core, materials that weren't even in chemistry textbooks at that time. The company saw dollar signs, mineral rights worth millions, but extraction would have been challenging, possibly impossible, with the technology of the era. The solution, Pierce claimed, was breathtakingly callous. Use the railway project as cover for a more experimental approach to accessing those minerals. The tunnel wasn't just a passage for trains, Pierce explained. It was designed as a massive extraction mechanism. They embedded specialized conductive metals in the rail lines, metals that would interact with the mountain's electromagnetic field. The theory was that under the right conditions, with the proper catalyst, the interaction could fractionate the surrounding rock structure, making the rare elements easier to extract. The proper catalyst, according to Pierce, was delivered aboard the Silver Comet on its final journey, disguised as routine postal cargo but actually containing experimental electrical equipment developed by the company's private research division. The plan was for a controlled reaction, a brief, localized disruption that would loosen the mineral deposits, but they miscalculated catastrophically. Instead of a minor electromagnetic pulse, they triggered something that fundamentally altered the physical properties of everything within the tunnel. Pierce's account explained the strange preparations before the Silver Comet's final journey, the removal of Trask's measuring instruments, the dismissal of workers who had raised concerns, the unusual cargo manifest that Henry Dolan had noted in his log. It also explained why the company moved so quickly to seal off the area and revise all records of Tunnel 9's existence. It wasn't just liability they feared. It was exposure of an unauthorized, experimental mining operation that had sacrificed 6 lives in pursuit of mineral wealth. "We buried that train before," Pierce confessed, echoing the words later found in his personal recordings. "And we buried it again in 51. Some secrets aren't meant to be unearthed." Pierce died 3 weeks after his meeting with Michael, taking many details to his grave. But his confession provided the missing link that connected corporate greed, scientific arrogance, and the impossible preservation of the Silver Comet. The company had knowingly sent Henry Dolan and his crew into an unstable situation, carrying equipment designed to trigger a reaction with unknown consequences. When that reaction trapped them in what Feynman had called a null-time state, the company chose to seal away both the evidence and the victims, rather than risk exposure. 40 years later, when Michael's excavation accidentally rediscovered what had been hidden, the government, possibly working with the corporate interests that had absorbed the original railway company, moved with the same decisive secrecy to rebury the truth. Armed with his grandfather's prophetic log, Trask's suppressed reports, and Pierce's deathbed confession, Michael Dolan had assembled a compelling case, not just of corporate negligence, but of deliberate endangerment and decades of coordinated cover-up. What he didn't yet realize was how dangerous this knowledge would prove, and that the forces that had twice buried the Silver Comet were still very much active and determined to keep their secrets hidden. When history warns us through the written word and we dismiss it as paranoia, we risk repeating the same silence that killed the innocent. But when we finally hear those warnings, decades too late, we face a new risk. Becoming the next voices silenced by those who prefer their truths remained entombed. Every pocket watch on the crew, recovered in the tunnel, had stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m., the last recorded time seen at the final telegraph signal. There are places where time, nature, and consequence overlap, and where human hands were never meant to dig. The comet's final moment serves as both a mystery and a warning. Some truths remain buried because uncovering them demands a price. By 1974, Michael Dolan had spent more than 2 decades investigating the fate of the Silver Comet. Now 49 years old, he had sacrificed his career with the railway, his marriage, and arguably his safety in pursuit of the truth. Though still employed in the transportation sector, he had been systematically blacklisted from any position with major railway operations, ostensibly for reliability concerns, but transparently because of his persistent inquiries into the events of 1911 and 1951. What he hadn't sacrificed was his methodical approach to documentation. Every piece of evidence, every interview transcript, every photograph and letter was carefully preserved in multiple locations, a lesson he had learned from his grandfather's duplicate logbook. If anything happened to him, the information would survive. This precaution proved prescient. In March 1975, Michael's apartment was broken into while he was at work. Though disguised as a routine burglary, the intrusion targeted his research materials while ignoring valuable electronics and jewelry. Fortunately, the thieves found only decoy documents. Michael had long since relocated his actual evidence to secure locations known only to himself and a few trusted allies. "They're getting nervous," he wrote in his journal afterward. "After all this time, they still don't want this story told, which means there's more at stake than historical accountability. There's something still active, still relevant, that they're protecting." Michael's closest ally in his investigation was Evelyn Trask, now in her 70s, but still sharp-minded and as determined as her father had been to expose the truth about Tunnel 9. Together, they had spent years building a network of contacts, former railway employees, retired government officials, scientists willing to analyze evidence, outside official channels, and journalists interested in corporate accountability and government secrecy. Through this network, they had managed to locate several workers who had been present during the 1951 rediscovery of the Silver Comet. Men who, despite signing non-disclosure agreements, were willing to share what they had witnessed under conditions of anonymity. One of these witnesses, identified only as Technician R in Michael's notes, had been part of the government team that removed the preserved bodies from the train. His testimony, recorded in 1973, provided disturbing details about the condition of the crew. They weren't like normal dead bodies, not like anything I'd seen during the war or in any medical context. There was no rigor mortis, no decomposition, but also no signs of life. Their skin was room temperature but maintained the elasticity of living tissue. Their eyes were open but completely still, not dried out as you'd expect after decades. Most disturbing was their positioning. They weren't sitting or slumped as you'd expect if the train had simply stopped. They were all standing, all in positions that suggested sudden movement, like a photograph capturing people in mid-action. Engineer Dolan had one hand on the throttle, the other reaching toward what looked like a control panel. His mouth was open as if speaking or shouting. The fireman, Reed, was caught in what appeared to be a diving motion toward the floor. The conductor, Jenkins, had both hands raised in front of his face, palms outward, like he was shielding himself from something bright. None of them showed any signs of trauma or injury, they just looked stopped. This description aligned perfectly with what Michael himself had observed during the brief period before government agents secured the site in 1951. It also corresponded with one of the most chilling details reported by multiple witnesses: the stopped watches. Every timepiece recovered from the train, pocket watches carried by each crew member, the engine cab's mechanical clock, even a small wristwatch belonging to Postal Guard Hawkins, relatively uncommon in 1911, had stopped at precisely 3:17 a.m. Not approximately the same time, but exactly the same minute and second, as confirmed by laboratory analysis, conducted covertly on a watch that one of the recovery technicians had managed to keep as a souvenir. This simultaneous stopping of all timepieces suggested that whatever had affected the train and its crew had done so with absolute instantaneity and totality, a phenomenon that conventional physics struggled to explain. Equally puzzling were the reports of environmental anomalies that persisted around the rediscovery site decades after the original incident. Multiple workers involved in the 1951 excavation described equipment malfunctions near the sealed tunnel, compass needles spinning wildly, battery-powered devices failing, unexplained static on radio communications. Technician M, another of Michael's anonymous sources, reported an even more disturbing phenomenon. Time itself felt wrong in there. I know how that sounds, but everyone on the team experienced it. You'd check your watch, do an hour's work, and check again to find only 10 minutes had passed. Or you'd take a short break and suddenly realize 3 hours were gone. We started operating in pairs just to maintain a sense of reality. One person working, one person keeping time and comparing notes. This temporal distortion effect that wasn't limited to subjective perception. Precise chronometers placed at different distances from the tunnel entrance showed measurable discrepancies. Devices closer to the site consistently lost time relative to those farther away. Scientists consulted privately by Michael's team proposed that these effects might be residual manifestations of whatever had originally trapped the Silver Comet, a localized warping of space-time that had never fully normalized even after 4 decades. Dr. Catherine Mercer, the geologist whose team had studied the area in the 1980s, described it as a wound in the fabric of reality that hasn't completely healed, like scar tissue that retains the memory of the original injury. By 1978, Michael and Evelyn had compiled enough evidence from credible sources to justify a formal investigation. They prepared a comprehensive dossier, including Henry Dolan's private log, Samuel Trask's suppressed reports, Howard Pierce's confession, testimony from witnesses to the 1951 rediscovery, and scientific analyses of the temporal anomalies still present at the site. Rather than taking their findings to the media, where they could easily be dismissed as sensationalism, they submitted formal requests for investigation to 3 different federal oversight bodies: the National Transportation Safety Board, the Department of the Interior's Office of Inspector General, and the newly formed Department of Energy, which had jurisdiction over issues involving radiation and electromagnetic phenomena. The response was swift, but not what they had hoped for. Within 2 weeks, all 3 agencies had declined to investigate, citing either lack of jurisdiction or insufficient evidence. More telling was the identical phrasing used in all 3 rejection letters, suggesting coordination from a single source above the individual agencies. Most alarming was what happened next. In December 1978, both Michael and Evelyn received visits from men identifying themselves as FBI agents, warning them that their activities might constitute violations of national security laws. No specific threats were made, but the message was clear. pursue this further at your peril. For most people, such warnings would have been sufficient deterrent. But Michael Dolan had spent too many years seeking answers about his grandfather's fate to abandon the search now. And Evelyn Trask, in her 80s and with nothing left to lose, as she put it, was equally determined. "They've hidden the truth twice," she told Michael. "We can't let them bury it a third time." Despite the risks, they decided to make one final push for disclosure, not through official channels that had already proven compromised, but through direct investigation of the site itself. If the temporal anomalies were still present, if scientific instruments could document what witnesses had described, they might finally have irrefutable evidence that could not be dismissed or suppressed. In April 1979, Michael assembled a small team for what he called Operation Timekeeper, a covert expedition to the former Tunnel 9 site, now officially designated as a restricted geological research area under Department of Energy Management. The team included Evelyn, who insisted on participating despite her age, a documentary filmmaker with experience in investigative journalism, a physicist specializing in quantum field theory, and two former military personnel with expertise in covert operations and specialized equipment. Using topographical maps and GPS coordinates derived from the original railway surveys, they planned a nighttime approach through the dense forest surrounding the restricted zone. Their equipment included high-sensitivity electromagnetic detectors, precision chronometers, radiation measurement devices, ground-penetrating radar, and specialized cameras designed to capture infrared and ultraviolet spectra invisible to the human eye. What they didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the site was monitored far more actively than its abandoned appearance suggested. The expedition began on April 17, 1979. The team established a base camp 3 miles from the restricted zone, disguising their presence as a geological survey party with appropriate permits for the public land surrounding the target area. On the night of April 18th, Michael, the physicist, and one of the former military specialists began their approach to the sealed tunnel site. They moved carefully through the forest, avoiding established trails and using night vision equipment to navigate the difficult terrain. Their first indication that something was wrong came approximately half a mile from the target. The physicist, Dr. Alan Morris, reported that his chronometer had suddenly jumped forward by 17 minutes, a temporal displacement more dramatic than any they had anticipated encountering at that distance. "Something's active," he whispered to Michael. "Whatever happened here in 1911, it isn't a static residual effect. It's dynamic, and it's expanding." As they continued their approach, the anomalies intensified. Compass needles spun erratically. Radio communication with their base camp became increasingly distorted. Their GPS devices showed them simultaneously in multiple locations, hundreds of miles apart. Despite these warnings, they pressed forward, driven by the promise of finally documenting what had been hidden for so long. At approximately 2:45 a.m., they reached the perimeter of what had once been the railway cutting leading to Tunnel 9. What they found was not what any of them had expected. Rather than the sealed tunnel entrance that had been documented in 1951 and supposedly dynamited shut afterward, they discovered what appeared to be an active excavation site. Modern equipment, powerful lights, and a temporary structure suggested recent and ongoing work. "They're reopening it," Michael realized with a shock. After all this time, they're going back in. From their concealed position in the forest edge, the team observed the site for nearly 30 minutes. Though no personnel were visible, the equipment showed signs of recent use. Generator-powered lights illuminated a massive steel door set into the mountainside, a door that certainly hadn't been part of the original tunnel or the 1951 rediscovery. At precisely 3:15 a.m., a timing that would later seem far from coincidental, their observation was interrupted by a low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate from the mountain itself. The sensation wasn't audible so much as physically palpable, a thrumming that resonated in their bones and teeth, exactly as Henry Dolan had described in his final log entry. Dr. Morris's instruments recorded a massive spike in electromagnetic activity, concentrated around what his reading suggested was a cavity deep within the mountain, roughly corresponding to where the silver comet had been discovered in 1951. "It's activating," he whispered urgently. "We need to leave, now." But before they could retreat, at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same minute recorded on the stopped watches of the Silver Comet's crew, something impossible happened. The steel door at the tunnel entrance swung open, revealing not the darkness of an excavated passage, but a brilliant blue-white light that seemed to flow like liquid. The light expanded outward in pulsating waves, illuminating the entire clearing with an unnatural radiance that cast no shadows. Michael's camera, automatically recording, captured what happened next, though the footage would later show severe distortion and electromagnetic interference. From within, the light emerged what appeared to be a train, not a modern vehicle, but an early 20th century locomotive that looked identical to historical photographs of the Silver Comet. It moved forward slowly, as if emerging from a fog, its wheels turning but making no contact with any visible track. Most incredibly, the figures visible through the engine cab windows appeared to be moving, men in period clothing operating controls, their actions deliberate but eerily slow, as if moving through thick liquid. "My God," Michael whispered, recognizing the distinctive profile of his grandfather at the throttle. "They're still alive in there. They're still moving." What happened next remains a subject of debate among the few who have viewed the degraded footage. The locomotive appeared to advance approximately 15 feet, beyond the tunnel entrance, then stop abruptly. The blue-white light intensified to blinding levels. The ground beneath the observer's feet vibrated violently. Then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The light vanished. The vibration ceased. When their vision cleared, the clearing was empty. No locomotive, no flowing light, only the modern equipment and the now closed steel door. Dr. Morris's instruments, which had been recording continuously, showed something astonishing. For approximately 94 seconds, time measurements within a 200-meter radius of the tunnel entrance had simply stopped. His atomic chronometer, synchronized with 3 satellites, indicated a gap in its recording, as if those seconds had never existed. More disturbing still was the effect on their own equipment. Michael's camera, though still operational, showed severe damage to its electronic components. The digital recording contained exactly 94 seconds of what appeared to be random static and electromagnetic interference, precisely when the locomotive had appeared. But the physical effects weren't limited to their equipment. All 3 men reported intense disorientation, temporary memory gaps, and what Dr. Morris described as chronological displacement, a sensation that events were occurring out of sequence or simultaneously. Most alarmingly, when they checked their own watches, they discovered all 3 had stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m., just like those of the Silver Comet's crew 68 years earlier. Recognizing the danger they were in, the team made an immediate retreat toward their base camp. But something had changed in the forest around them. Paths they had carefully marked hours earlier seemed to lead in circles. Landmarks appeared in different positions than they remembered. The journey back, which should have taken approximately 40 minutes, stretched into hours of increasingly desperate navigation. When they finally reached their base camp at dawn, they found it deserted. Their support team, equipment, and vehicles all gone without explanation. Only Evelyn Trask remained sitting calmly beside a small fire, as if nothing were amiss. "They came about an hour after you left," she explained, her voice strangely serene. "Men in black SUVs, very polite, very efficient. They knew exactly who we were and what we were doing. They took the others and all our documentation, said it was a matter of national security. They left me behind because, as they put it, no one would believe an old woman anyway. What Evelyn told them next would haunt Michael for the rest of his life. They weren't surprised by any of it, she said. In fact, they seemed to be expecting us. One of them, clearly in charge, told me something very specific to relay to you, Michael. He said, "Tell Dolan we've been watching that tunnel every night at 317 for 68 years. Tell him his grandfather and the others are still in transit. Their journey isn't over, and neither is ours." Within hours of their return to civilization, the team began experiencing the repercussions of their expedition. Dr. Morris was detained by Department of Energy officials for alleged violations of restricted area access. The former military specialist disappeared entirely, his family later reporting that he had accepted an overseas consulting position on short notice. Michael himself was approached by men claiming to represent a classified research division, seeking his cooperation and expertise regarding the Tunnel 9 phenomena. The offer was presented as an opportunity to finally learn the truth about his grandfather's fate, but it came with stringent confidentiality requirements that would have prevented him from ever sharing that truth with the world. He declined. 3 days later, his apartment was destroyed in what authorities ruled an accidental gas explosion. Michael, who had anticipated such measures and had not returned to his residence, watched the news reports from a motel room 3 states away. Evelyn Trask, true to the government agent's assessment, attempted to contact media outlets with their story. As predicted, she was uniformly dismissed as confused or delusional. She died 6 months later of apparently natural causes, though the timing struck Michael as suspiciously convenient for those who wished to silence her. Only the documentary filmmaker, who had remained at the base camp and been detained during the operation, eventually resurfaced. Released after 3 days of intensive questioning, she found that her career opportunities mysteriously dried up. No major network or production company would work with her. Her previous contracts were canceled without explanation. "They didn't threaten me directly," she later told Michael during a clandestine meeting. "They didn't have to. They simply ensured that any platform I might use to tell this story became inaccessible. It's a more sophisticated form of silencing than physical intimidation. They erase your credibility and your access rather than your life." Despite these setbacks, Michael Dolan continued his investigation, now operating with extreme caution and multiple layers of security. He established coded communication channels with researchers, witnesses, and journalists who shared his interest in the truth. Gradually building a protected network for information exchange that existed beneath the notice of those monitoring more obvious channels. Through this network, he learned that the phenomena he had witnessed at Tunnel 9 were not unique. Similar temporal anomalies had been documented at multiple locations globally, always associated with unusual geological formations, electromagnetic aberrations, and, in many cases, indigenous warnings about places where time behaves differently. Most significantly, he discovered that the government's interest in these phenomena extended far beyond covering up a corporate mining experiment gone wrong in 1911. The Department of Energy, in conjunction with military research divisions, had been actively studying and attempting to harness these temporal anomalies since at least the early 1950s, precisely when the Silver Comet had been rediscovered. The site at Tunnel 9 wasn't just being monitored, it was being utilized. The steel door, the modern equipment, the precisely timed observations at 3:17 a.m., all suggested an ongoing research program focused on what one leaked document referred to as temporal phase transitions. What had begun as a corporate disaster and cover-up had evolved into something far more complex, a government research program investigating phenomena that challenged our fundamental understanding of time, space, and the boundaries of physical reality. And at the center of it all remained the Silver Comet and its crew, men who, according to the evidence Michael had gathered, might not be dead in any conventional sense, but trapped in a state of temporal suspension, their journey through Tunnel 9 still ongoing in some incomprehensible way that transcended normal physical and temporal constraints. The watches that had stopped at 3:17 a.m. on October 12, 1911, hadn't simply failed mechanically. They had marked the moment when time itself had changed its relationship to those 6 men, a change that, decades later, continued to ripple through reality around the mountain that had swallowed them. There are places where time, nature, and consequence overlap, and where human hands were never meant to dig. The comet's final moment serves as both a mystery and a warning. Some truths remain buried because uncovering them demands a price. It's a price that Michael Dolan, in his pursuit of answers about his grandfather's fate, had come to understand all too well. The Silver Comet's story is more than a century old, yet its echoes continue in abandoned infrastructure projects, in forgotten worker fatalities, and in the silences maintained by powerful entities. Because the past doesn't vanish, it waits to be unearthed. On December 4th, 1984, Michael Dolan was found dead in his home in Billings, Montana. The official cause of death was listed as myocardial infarction, a heart attack. He was 59 years old. There was no autopsy. His obituary made no mention of his 3-decade investigation into the disappearance of the Silver Comet. It described him simply as a retired transportation safety consultant and noted his military service during World War II. The only reference to his family legacy was a brief acknowledgement that he was the grandson of Henry Dolan, railway engineer. To most readers, it would have appeared unremarkable, the routine death notice of an ordinary man who had lived a quiet life and left little mark on the world. Nothing could have been further from the truth. 10 days after Michael's funeral, packages began arriving at the offices of selected journalists, academics, and public interest organizations across the country. Each contained identical contents, a comprehensive dossier documenting Michael's investigation into the Silver Comet disappearance, including copies of Henry Dolan's private logbook, Samuel Trask's suppressed reports, witness testimonies from the 1951 rediscovery, and Michael's own observations from the 1979 expedition to Tunnel 9. Accompanying each package was a letter written by Michael and dated November 15, 1984, 3 weeks before his death. If you're reading this, I am no longer able to continue the work of bringing this truth to light. I have arranged for these materials to be distributed in the event of my death or disappearance, not because I anticipate foul play, but because I've learned that those who wish to keep certain truths buried are methodical and patient. What you hold in your hands is the product of 33 years of investigation into what might appear, at first glance, to be a simple historical curiosity: the disappearance of a train in 1911. But as the enclosed documents demonstrate, this incident represents something far more significant: a convergence of corporate malfeasance, government secrecy, and phenomena that challenge our fundamental understanding of physical reality. I do not ask you to believe everything presented here without question. I ask only that you approach this material with an open mind and the rigor of genuine inquiry. Follow the evidence where it leads. Ask the questions that others have been discouraged from asking. And perhaps most importantly, share what you discover. The truth about the Silver Comet matters, not just for the 6 men who vanished aboard it, or for their families who were denied closure, but for what it reveals about the institutions we trust and the reality we think we understand. The past doesn't vanish. It waits to be unearthed. The response to these packages varied dramatically. Some recipients immediately dismissed the materials as elaborate fiction or the product of a disturbed mind. Others recognized the authenticity of the historical documents, but questioned Michael's more extraordinary claims about temporal anomalies and government experimentation. A small but significant number, however, took the information seriously enough to begin their own investigations. Quietly at first, then with increasing coordination as they discovered corroborating evidence that extended far beyond what Michael himself had documented. By the early 1990s, this loose network of investigators had managed to verify several key elements of Michael's account. The Helena and Northwestern Railway Company had indeed commissioned unusual geological surveys of the Tunnel 9 area in 1908, specifically focused on mineral composition rather than structural stability. Samuel Trask had filed multiple safety reports about anomalous conditions at the tunnel, and these reports had been systematically redacted in the official investigation. The 1951 rediscovery of the Silver Comet had been abruptly terminated by military intervention, with all evidence and witnesses subjected to national security restrictions. The area around former Tunnel 9 remained under Department of Energy jurisdiction, designated as a geological research site, but with security measures far exceeding those typical for scientific installations. Perhaps most significantly, Freedom of Information Act requests filed in 1992 revealed the existence of a classified research program called Project Chronolith, established in 1952, 1 year after the Silver Comet's rediscovery, and focused on what limited unredacted documentation described as temporal displacement phenomena in geological formations. While these discoveries validated much of Michael's conventional research, his more extraordinary claims about the perfectly preserved crew and the temporal anomalies he witnessed in 1979 remained impossible to verify independently. The site itself remained inaccessible, and no photographs or instrumental data from the 1951 rediscovery had ever been released to the public. That changed in 1997 when an anonymous source, identified only as T9 in subsequent communications, contacted several members of the investigative network with an offer of classified materials related to the Silver Comet case. What T9 provided was explosive: 26 photographs from the 1951 rediscovery, official laboratory analyses of materials recovered from the tunnel, and partial documentation of the subsequent military research program at the site. The photographs, though somewhat degraded, clearly showed what Michael had described. The Silver Comet, intact and undamaged, embedded within what appeared to be solid stone. More disturbing were the close-up images of the crew, men frozen in mid-motion, their features perfectly preserved, with no signs of decomposition despite the 40 years that had passed since their disappearance. Laboratory analyses confirmed the anomalous nature of the stone surrounding the train, describing it as conventional limestone in composition, but with a crystalline structure inconsistent with natural formation processes. More puzzling were references to temporal radiation signatures and chronometric displacement fields, detected in samples taken from both the surrounding rock and the preserved organic material of the crew. Most revealing was a partially redacted research summary from 1964, which included this assessment. The T9 anomaly represents the most significant confirmed instance of spontaneous temporal phase transition yet documented. While earlier theoretical models suggested such phenomena might occur only under extreme energy conditions, e.g., supernova remnants, black hole event horizons, the Montana site demonstrates that similar effects can manifest in terrestrial environments when specific geological, electromagnetic, and redacted factors converge. Of particular significance is the predictable recurrence of active transition windows at the site, consistently, manifesting at 0317 hours daily, with peak intensity occurring on the anniversary of the initial event. This predictability has allowed for controlled observation and limited experimental interaction with the phase-shifted materials. Preliminary results suggest that the subjects, original train crew, exist in a state of suspended temporal progression, neither alive nor dead in conventional terms, but in a third state for which we currently lack adequate descriptive language. Their observable movement during active windows, approximately 94 seconds daily, suggests continued consciousness and activity within their reference frame, proceeding at an approximately 1/8 ratio to standard time, i.e., our single day equals 1 second in their perceived experience. In simpler terms, the men aboard the Silver Comet weren't dead. They were experiencing time at a radically decelerated rate, still moving, still conscious, still aboard a train they believed was passing through Tunnel 9 on October 12, 1911. From their perspective, less than 8 minutes had passed since they entered the tunnel. From ours, it had been over 8 decades. The documents provided by T9 also revealed something Michael Dolan had suspected but never managed to confirm. The government's interest in the site wasn't merely scientific curiosity or cover-up of a historical corporate crime. They were actively attempting to harness and replicate the temporal phase transition for military and intelligence applications. A heavily redacted 1972 progress report outlined potential strategic implementations, including secure information storage in temporally displaced media, immune to conventional access or destruction. Protected observation platforms in conflict zones, observers experiencing compressed time relative to events. Redacted allowing strategic asset deployment with minimal detection probability. Preservation of critical personnel during redacted scenarios for subsequent reintegration. The report concluded with a sobering assessment. While controlled initiation of phase transitions remains beyond current capabilities, the predictable recurrence at the T9 site provides ongoing opportunity for experimental interface with the phenomenon. Caution is warranted, as the precise mechanism that triggered the original 1911 event remains incompletely understood, and uncontrolled replication could result in catastrophic temporal destabilization. When these materials became available to the investigative network, the focus shifted from merely documenting the historical disappearance of the Silver Comet to understanding the ongoing research at the site and the potential dangers it represented. Satellite imagery obtained in 2001 revealed substantial underground construction at the former Tunnel 9 location, far more extensive than would be necessary for mere observation of the anomaly. Whistleblower accounts from former security personnel suggested experiments had progressed beyond passive monitoring to active attempts at manipulating the temporal displacement field. One former scientist who had worked at the facility between 1998 and 2003 provided particularly troubling information about the direction of the research. They've moved beyond studying the original anomaly. They're trying to weaponize it. The goal isn't just understanding temporal displacement, it's creating portable, deployable technology that can induce similar effects under controlled conditions. They're using the original victims, the train crew, as test subjects, exploiting the fact that they're still technically alive, but trapped in a state where they can't consent or object. This ethical dimension, the ongoing exploitation of Henry Dolan and his crew, galvanized public interest advocates within the investigative network. In 2005, a coalition of human rights attorneys filed a unique legal petition seeking recognition of the Silver Comet's crew as persons in ongoing detention without due process, and demanding access to the facility for independent medical and scientific evaluation. The case, inevitably, was dismissed on national security grounds before reaching any substantive hearing, but it succeeded in bringing public attention to the story in ways that direct disclosure of the classified materials could not. Major media outlets, initially hesitant to engage with such an incredible narrative, began publishing investigative pieces examining the historical record of the Silver Comet's disappearance and the government's decades-long classification of the site. This increased scrutiny led to a significant breakthrough in 2007 when Department of Energy whistleblower Dr. Rachel Mercer, daughter of geologist Dr. Catherine Mercer, who had studied the site in the 1980s, provided congressional testimony about ethical violations in classified temporal research programs. While she was legally prohibited from directly discussing the Silver Comet case, her carefully worded testimony made clear references to human subjects maintained in artificially prolonged temporal suspension without consent, and multi-generational ethical breaches in ongoing research derived from a transportation incident in the early 20th century. Following Dr. Mercer's testimony, the facility at former Tunnel 9, by then officially designated as Montana Special Research Site Alpha, was placed under enhanced congressional oversight. While the classified nature of the research prevented full public disclosure, periodic Inspector General reports confirmed that historical human subjects at the site were now being treated according to established bioethical protocols, with efforts underway to resolve their indeterminate status in a manner consistent with human dignity. What exactly this meant for Henry Dolan and his crew remains unclear. Some sources suggest attempts were being made to reintegrate them into normal temporal flow, essentially allowing them to complete the journey they began in 1911 with all the physical and psychological trauma that would entail. Others indicate that medical ethics committees had determined such reintegration would constitute a form of euthanasia, as their bodies, while preserved, would not survive the transition back to normal biological processes after so many decades in suspension. The most recent verified information, dating from 2019, indicates that the crew remains in their state of temporal displacement, but with an important change. The government facility built around them has been redesigned as a more dignified long-term care environment rather than an experimental laboratory. Medical personnel monitor their condition during the daily 94-second active windows, and efforts are made to communicate with them through visual means, visible within their dramatically slowed reference frame. In a final poignant development in 2015, over a century after the Silver Comet's disappearance, the families of the 6 crew members were finally granted limited access to the facility. While strict security protocols prevented them from removing any evidence or documentation, they were permitted to view their ancestors during an active window and to leave personal items and messages that would, over time, become visible to the temporally displaced men. Margaret Dolan's great-granddaughter, Emily, was among those who participated in this visitation. In a private account shared with the investigative network, she described the experience. "They warned us what to expect, but nothing could have prepared me for actually seeing him, my great-grandfather, exactly as he appears in family photographs, moving with glacial slowness behind glass that separates not just space, but time itself. During the 94 seconds we were allowed to observe, I saw his head turn perhaps half an inch, his hand move a fraction of a millimeter on the throttle. At that rate, a single blink of his eye would take hours from our perspective." The scientists explained that from his perspective, our visit lasted approximately 1/100th of a second, far too brief for him to perceive us at all. But they've developed systems to communicate across this temporal divide, slow-changing visual displays that remain static from our perspective for months, but transition at a rate he can perceive. They allowed me to record a message that will be converted to this format, a few words that will take years to appear completely from our perspective, but will be readable for him. I chose the simplest truth. We found you. We never stopped looking. You are not forgotten. As we approach the 115th anniversary of the Silver Comet's disappearance, this hard-won measure of recognition and dignity for its crew represents both a victory and a sobering reminder of the cost of institutional silence. Had the Helena and Northwestern Railway Company acknowledged the dangers Samuel Trask identified in 1911, had they prioritized safety over profit and scientific ethics over resource extraction, 6 men might have lived full lives rather than becoming unwilling participants in a century-long temporal experiment. The Silver Comet story continues to resonate not just as a historical curiosity or scientific anomaly, but as a powerful metaphor for how institutional silence preserves injustice across generations. The company buried the truth, the government classified it, And for decades, only a few persistent voices, Samuel Trask, Margaret Dolan, Michael Dolan, Evelyn Trask, refused to accept that silence. Steel doesn't just vanish, Michael Dolan wrote in his final letter. Men don't simply disappear into thin air, unless someone makes them. That deliberate vanishing, not the mysterious temporal phenomenon itself, but the calculated effort to hide it, remains the most disturbing aspect of the Silver Comet case. It reminds us that even the most inexplicable events are further distorted by the very human tendency to bury uncomfortable truths. In the end, the story of the Silver Comet is not just about a train trapped between moments or men suspended in time. It's about the cost of silence, how the suppression of truth damages not just those directly silenced, but the society that accepts such silence as necessary or inevitable. The past doesn't vanish. It waits to be unearthed, sometimes literally, as with the silver comet in its tomb of crystallized time, and sometimes figuratively, as with the documents and testimonies that gradually revealed the full scope of what happened that October night in 1911. As we continue to seek understanding of temporal anomalies like those at Tunnel 9, perhaps the most important lesson lies not in the physics of time distortion, but in the ethics of how we respond when confronted with phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality. Do we exploit such discoveries regardless of human cost? Do we classify and conceal them to maintain institutional power? Or do we approach them with transparency, ethical consideration, and respect for those affected? The Silver Comet's journey through Tunnel 9 continues, seconds stretching into decades, moments into lifetimes. But thanks to the persistence of those who refuse to accept convenient lies, that journey no longer continues in darkness and denial. The light of truth, however long delayed, has finally reached them. And perhaps somewhere in that slowed-down world of 3:17 a.m., October 12, 1911, Henry Dolan is gradually becoming aware that his final warning did not go unheard, that the logbook he left behind eventually found its way to those who would understand its significance and honor his memory by uncovering the truth he feared would be buried with him. The mountain may have swallowed the train, but it could not consume the truth forever. The past doesn't vanish. It waits, sometimes for generations, to be unearthed. What other secrets might still lie buried beneath the weight of institutional silence, waiting for someone brave enough to dig?